The Kansas City Royals deep dive. And we look at a team that's been around for 55 seasons coming into the league in 1969.
It's interesting to think about that. They've been in the league for 55 years, but actually they're one of the newer franchises.
It feels like that, doesn't it?
You think
How do you even know that, though? That's before you were born.
Right, but think of it. They've been around for a long time now. But in the history of baseball, they're actually one of the newer franchises, which is just bizarre to think about.
Well, I think in that 69 season with divisional play starting, you had 4 new teams, at that point. So
we've only added, I think, 4 teams since then?
The Rockies, the Marlins, the Rays,
and the D-backs.
And
the Blue Jays?
And the Blue Jays came in 77. So after that, that's true. That counts. That counts as well.
All right. Those 5 teams?
Yes, and the Rays.
And the Rays we had in the original 4.
I think they were 77, the Rays. They came in 77.
The Rays?
The Devil Rays.
Came in 70.
So they were 93. That's 93.
They were 90.
Right.
They were 90.
You're right.
They were with the Diamondbacks.
Right. So I'm forgetting another team that came in 1977. So
Seattle?
Seattle, yeah. I think you're right. So in 69 it was the Padres and the Royals and the Expos and the Seattle Pilots, which then became the Milwaukee Brewers.
Who then years later go on to get back a franchise in the Mariners.
So the Royals they're part of our 2 World Series winning team groups, and we're kind of bouncing around a little bit here because we still have yet to do the Phillies. But it's amazing how many franchises that have been around, even 55 seasons, 2 World Series. Well, that's better than the Mets, right? Who have 2 in 60.
Well, I think what you're going to see is that there's only so many World Series that could have been won, first off. And secondly, there's one team that kind of has a lot of them, which really limits the ability for other teams to win World Series. Like when one team has close to 33% of the total World Series, it's going to kind of throw the odds and everything into a bit of a chaos.
So all time, the Royals record, and this, I don't know if I had to think about the Royals before I looked at it. I thought, do they have a winning record all time or a 500 record all time or a losing record?
I would have to guess under, just because my entire life, other than that brief period in 2014 to 2016, they've not been a very good franchise. So it would be hard for me to believe with all of these years where they've been terrible that they'd have above a 500.
And they don't. As of just the other day, they're 4,084 wins and 4,485 losses. So about 400 games under 500 for the history of the franchise. For a 47,
that's gonna take a long time to get back up to 500.
And there aren't too bad. I think 47.7% that is. That's among the lower ones, right? It's amazing how close they are. I think the Yankees are the best at like a 53% almost, and the worst is going to be at 47. I don't think they really vary too much.
Everybody's going to be bunched up right there because it would be really hard for one team. Let's put it this way: if you had all of the normal numbers, but then there was one team that had like a 61% win rate for their history, something would be wrong there because that wouldn't make any sense.
Right. And they've got 9 playoff appearances in their 55 years, so once every 6 years or so, they make the playoffs, and as you pointed out, they've been particularly rough, aside from 14 through 16, as you pointed out.
Since the turn of the century.
Yeah, and they're not very good again this year, and a lot of that's about how much money they don't spend.
Now they have committed to a full rebuild after that the World Series core broke apart in 2014. And I think one of the things that Royal fans from what they would said is that they
won in 15. They won in
15. But there was the 14-15 teams, but they held on to some of the guys from those teams for a little too long.
And that's just so baseball.
Right. And they didn't commit to a full rebuild until like 2 or 3 years ago. I'd say when they got rid of Whit Merrifield. Mm-hmm. That's when they committed to
okay, we're done.
We're tearing this all down and rebuilding it from the ground up. The only guy that's kind of still around from back then is Salvador Perez, who was going to go down as an all-time Royal. And,
of course, Greinke's back there this year pitching what I assume will be his final Major League season.
By the way, if anyone just doesn't know, there should be a book about the wild things Zach Greinke talks about, because he is just the funniest guy.
Yeah, he's great.
Did you hear the story he was telling about when he's facing Votto one time? So he's talking about when he's facing Votto one night. He's like, yeah, so I threw him 3 hanging sliders in a row. And like they're like, what? Why? And he's like, well, I know Joey's the only kind of guy that's got an eye good enough to see the spin on the ball and know how it's supposed to break. So I figured I'd throw him hanging ones, and then he would just swing and miss. Somebody went and looked up the stats. He went like 0 for 4 that day against him.
I really like Greinke. One of the things that I really like about him is that he was a tennis champion at like age 10 to 12, and he had to decide between tennis and baseball. Clearly, he made the right choice. But that he, a pitcher and tennis player, that kind of links up pretty well.
He's a Hall of Famer in talent and a Hall of Famer in stories. There's a great story. He's talking to some guy. He's just like, oh man, I don't know if you can trust anybody without dogs. Like that, doesn't like dogs. And his teammates just like, oh yeah, you gotta love dogs. They're the best. I don't know about cats though. Zach, what do you got? Oh, I got cats. It's just such a bizarre thing that like Greinke would be leading him on only to just be like, yeah, I have cats.
So you noted this before we started. The winningest manager is Ned Yost from the World Series winning team. Of course, he had a 471 win-loss percentage, he's under 500.
Right there.
He's the winningest manager.
I mean, really, is that just saying there's got to be some ones that really stink for them then?
So they came out of the gate strongly because by their third season in 1971, they were over 500. They were 85 and 76, which, a lot of times that's, pretty difficult. I mean, the Marlins are probably the team that you think about the most, coming to the league in 93 and then winning the World Series in 4 years later in 97.
Did the Diamondbacks do that, coming in 97 and then winning it in 01?
In 01, same 4 year period. Yes, I think that's right. That's right. So
the Rockies did not have that kind of turnaround.
No. No, and they still were waiting for their first World Series
technically,
appearance.
The Nationals came in and won it.
No, they're the Expos.
I think they won it like 16 years later.
They're the Expos. Come on. So they're Hall of Fame inductees. Whitey Herzog, who was a manager there for a lot of years, and he also managed in the Cardinal organization and was an executive in the Met organization, and they let him go. And that was a bad move by the Mets because Whitey Herzog was a great baseball guy.
I'm going to admit, when I hear that name, my first thing went to Warner Herzog, the film director.
They used to call Whitey Herzog the White Rat because he had white hair, and I thought he didn't mind being called that, and I would have not liked that at all.
I would have liked that nickname, and I don't think you would get away with calling somebody that today.
So somehow Joe Gordon is in their Hall of Fame, and I can't figure. He must have been an executive or something like that. Voted by the Veterans Committee, and he was inducted.
Joe Gordon, not Joe Morgan.
Inducted as a player. So he wasn't a player for the Royals, obviously, because he was long retired. George Brett, we'll talk about George Brett a lot in this podcast.
I think if you're talking about the store of the Royals, it's kind of hard to avoid talking about George Brett.
I don't know. I guess Orlando Cepeda played for the Royals.
But I don't think of that.
He ain't a Royal. Gaylord Perry, there's that name again.
I think Saberhagen.
He's not right. These are their Hall of Famers,
right? But if I'm thinking big time
Royal
guys, I would think Saberhagen.
I guess Killebrew played for the Royals at one point. I don't remember that. And Bob Lemon, who was a manager more prominently in my mind than a player, he was a pitcher before that. Was a Royal at some point because he's in as a player, but he wasn't.
So is Brett the only guy that's in as a Royal?
As a player, as a Royal who was primarily a Royal. That, exactly.
So Salvador Perez actually, that could
I think
be.
It's Greinke. Doesn't Greinke go in as a Royal?
Greinke has to go in as a Royal.
Doesn't he go as a Royal?
Especially because he went back there.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Right.
So
Greinke will go in as a Royal next.
They have won 100 games only one time in 1977. So that surprised me, I guess. That's not great, right? You'd think the team would somehow stumble into 100 wins. They didn't win the World Series that year, as we like to talk about. So that's kind of typical as well. And they lost 100 games 6 times, but they've done that all since 2002.
Right.
That's what
I was saying. Is for me, my memory of them, they've just been bad since the turn of the millennium. They just a real rough, long stretch. Other than that one period where it all came together for them.
Right, and that was I would say that was a well-managed team because from a talent perspective, they were not better than the teams in the league, much less than the Mets that season, I think.
But they executed.
And of course, they had gone to the World Series the year before in 14 and lost to that Giants, winning the third time in 5 years.
Right, and that was the Mad Bum Game 7 performance.
And to get all the way back the next year and to beat a team that was thought to be a better team than them, hats off, man. That's a great World Series win for them.
That was a team,
and they earned that.
Like we talk about teams on a mission. That was a team on a mission that year.
So, when you go through the all-time records, and we'll talk about their war leaders because that's always fun to do for a team that I don't know some of the players.
Well, right, you get a lot of interesting guys on a list like this because a lot of the Hall of Famers that we mentioned that have played for the Royals did not play for them during their big parts of their career.
Right.
So there's some guys on this list that I had never really heard of.
So George Brett is really the only guy that I think, and he's like, if there are 30 categories in Baseball Reference, George Brett is first in like 20 of them.
Right. If it's an offensive category for the Royals, George Brett probably leads it, and if he doesn't, he's second.
And I said we're not Royal fans, but I thought about, well, who's the all-time leader in Royal home runs? George Brett. He had 317. George Brett had 317 home runs. I didn't think of him as a home run hitter. Right. He still had 317. That's amazing.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. So, yeah, he leads in WAR, offensive WAR. He's second in batting average all time. The leader in Royal, but now he only did it for 3 seasons as a Royal. So there should be like, if you're going to put like who's the all-time leader in batting average.
Right, you need to have like a minimum
3 seasons. Jose Offerman. And by the way, who never hit anywhere like that for the rest of his career.
I do remember he had a couple of amazing years for the Royals. I think he signed out with the Mets after that.
Yeah, I think he ended up. So he also leads an on-base percentage, which is also unfair to George Brett, who did it for like 35 years or something like that. So the slugging percentage is a guy I mentioned before, Danny Tartable, and you said Danny Tartable. I never heard of him. So all I remember about Danny Tartable, he was a power hitter who ended up. I don't know if they signed him as a free agent. I think George signed him as a free agent, came to the Yankees. Danny Tartable's this great player. He was terrible as a Yankee. Oh, and he was one of those, he kind of got run out of town.
Probably why I've never heard of him.
Right, because he didn't have, but George Brett is, games played, at-bats, plate appearances, runs scored, hits, total bases, doubles, triples, home runs, runs batted in, bases on ball. This is all George Brett leading the
It's impressive also that he leads in home runs, doubles, and triples, but doesn't lead in slugging percentage.
Right, which just means the guy didn't play enough to have, to have it go down and revert to the mean. The stolen base leader is not George Brett, obviously, wouldn't be. You don't remember because this guy played in the 80s, and anybody that watched the Royals, the teams and then they won the World Series in 1985, obviously, with Saberhagen and George Brett. And Frank White at second base, and his center fielder was Willie Wilson. And Willie Wilson was the speedster. He had 612 stolen bases, and that was the
He's
Royal.
one of the all-time stolen base leaders.
He's up there in
talked
career.
About him, and his big issue for the Hall of Fame was that he really only had the steals. That was like the only thing he had.
Yeah, actually, it was a pretty good hitter, in terms of average, but had no power.
But yeah, it was like when you looked at his stats for a Hall of Fame candidacy, he didn't even have some of the other things that the other stolen base guys did have.
But he didn't lead the Royals in stolen base percentage. And who do you think would? Come on, Met fan.
So it's got to be, who's that shortstop?
No.
I was going to guess
Met fan. Think stolen base percentage. Who has the best stolen bases in the history of
Beltran.
base? There you go. There you go. It's Beltran, yeah. So, and he was an amazing.
I was thinking Met Killer.
Right.
Killer Met.
Well, only when he looked at the third strike from, anyway. And Cookie Rojas is in there for at-bats per strikeout. But George Brett just is, Mr. Royal when you think about it, because the rest of the guys on this list, like we said, are just not, memorable names. And some of the names you don't even know. How about the pitchers? So who is the greatest Royal pitcher?
I'd already guessed Saberhagen.
Yeah. He's not by WAR.
Who I have no idea.
So this really surprised me because he was a nice pitcher, I thought. Kevin Apier.
Oh, I was going to guess. Oh, wow.
Sorry, Royal fans.
I guess Kenny Rogers.
No, I don't think he plays for them. Or at least not enough to get. So Saberhagen is in top in walks and hits per inning pitched.
Greinke was a good Royal, but he wasn't there for a large part of his
career.
No,
I thought he pitched there long enough. I bet you he pitched 7 or 8 years for the Royals. If he's going to go in as a Royal, he had to be there long enough to be able to do that. So there's a bunch of guys. So if I go through, the earned run average leader is Dan Quisenberry.
Who?
Oh, so you don't remember Dan Quisenberry? Submarine relief pitcher, really good pitcher. Obviously was on that 85. Well, not obviously, but was on the 85 team.
Probably why I don't remember.
All-time Royal wins for a pitcher, Paul Splittorff. Yeah.
Did he throw a splitter?
Left-handed pitcher. The one lowest percentage is Jason Vargas. Remember Jason Vargas?
I do remember Jason
the former Met.
I'm just shocked he qualified.
And Jeff Montgomery leads in saves.
That I believe.
And in quite a few offensive categories.
Offensive categories.
Pitching categories, I should say. All-time categories. Complete games, a guy you've never heard of. Shutouts, like the same guy. And he also gave it the most home runs. The same pitcher, Dennis Leonard. No, you wouldn't. And I hadn't seen that name in a while. Mark Gubiza, who's a commentator now, a fine major league pitcher, leads in ignominious categories: bases on balls, wild pitches, and hit by pitch. He leads in those three.
I'm sure he would
get Mark on the podcast there and talk about that.
I'm sure Mark probably would have preferred you didn't bring up.
Did he have any like positive? No. No,
now that he's leading the team.
No, not in any positive categories. So let's. Why don't you start? Take us through. Okay, so the obvious all-time leader for WAR
is the obvious number one is George Brett.
So the second one is Apier, which just tells you a lot about the franchise. They don't keep their players.
Right, and I think that's more what you're looking at than anything else is that they just don't keep their play like because it's like Apier gets it more just by longevity with the franchise than anything else.
Right? How could they get it so right with George Brett and get it so wrong with everybody else? I really don't understand it. And the third all-time, and this kills Met fans, you wouldn't know this either, right? The third all-time WAR guy is Amos Otis, a really fine defensive center who was a Met, and they traded him for a guy named Joe Foy and a sack of baseballs. And yeah, it didn't work out well for the Mets. And Amos Otis went on to be a multi-time All-Star and all that stuff. And the Met fans were like, had to watch this guy have a great career going, but that's our center fielder. He's supposed to be on our team. Willie Wilson is fourth all time.
Yep.
Okay, Saberhagen is fifth.
So there comes in Saberhagen.
Okay, so those are guys we talked about. Those are real. Mark Gubiza is somehow sixth. So he would pitch there in addition to hitting people and walking people, but he pitched there long enough.
It tells you when you look at this list.
Good pitcher, by the way.
You're not seeing a guy like Beltran super high up on this list. You're not seeing a guy like Greinke
Didn't
super high up on this list. They didn't stay there. And that could be the biggest failing of the Royals is that they've had some exemplary players pass through their franchise that they've had to let go for various reasons.
Frank White was a guy who stayed there his whole time, so he accumulated 34 WAR because he was a really solid second baseman, but did nothing fantastic offensively at a time when maybe second baseman didn't do so many super things unless you're a Ryan Sandberg or something like that. And so he's there because he was a guy. I think he might have played his whole career with the Royals. Let me take a quick look. So there's another guy they kept. Yes, he played all 18 years with the Royals. So there's a guy, and that's how we'd say WAR is a cumulative stat, folks, and this is a perfect example of that. Alex Gordon played a long time with the Royals. He follows at number 8 for all-time WAR. Salvador Perez has played his whole career for the Royals. He's behind him, so there's a theme here. Zach Greinke is 10th.
Yep, Zach Greinke comes in at the 10.
So, and he pitched, how many years did he pitch for the Royals? 9 years for the Royals. So, right, he's got to go in as a Royal, I think, more than anything else. Hal McRae, Sr., somebody you don't probably know very much about. You might have heard of Howard McKay Jr. Dennis Lederer, we talked about him. He's out there because he pitched there for a long time. Quisenberry. Beltran checks in at 14. So that's how good Beltran was. Because how many years do you think he played for Kansas City?
3? 5
maximum. I don't think he played that many. He played 7 years. Wrongo. I'm wrong. 7 years. How did he play 7? I am shocked at that. And it was all at the beginning of his career. So that when he went to Houston that year, I just didn't realize. I thought he was still a really young player when he went to the Astros. And in
they
effect,
traded him.
He was because he was only 27 when he went to the Astros.
When he was having his best season yet that year.
Right.
And then they traded him to New York, and he was great for them.
Yeah,
he went to sign in New York.
We'll see. Does he go into the Hall of Fame, Beltran, as a Royal or a Met?
Buck gets fired this year, and Beltran becomes a new manager. I bet he goes in as a Met.
Oh, that's a good call. That's a really interesting call on that. Wow. Okay.
Because I could see that happening. If Buck goes this year, I could see Beltran coming in as the Met manager.
Right. So where did he play most of his?
It's split. It's either New York or
he played 7 for the Royals.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
They have totals.
He played 6.5. He played 1, 2, 3,
7 for the Royals, 7 for the Mets.
Yeah. So it'll come down to who he feels more strongly connected to organizationally. Considering his actions, I would guess it's the Mets.
Yeah. Would the Royal fans be upset that he doesn't go in as a Royal? I mean, he played the same amount of years.
His biggest years were the Mets, though. His most high.
Interesting. It's interesting because they don't have a Hall of Fame guy. That's what I'm saying. It would mean so much more to the Royal fans if he were to go in as a Royal.
Right.
So Lorenzo Cain follows him on the list. We certainly know all about Lorenzo. Recently retired Lorenzo Cain, really fine ball player. Mike Sweeney, who was the proverbial professional hitter, right, behind him.
The DH before DH.
Yes, well put. Splittorf, we mentioned him. Charlie Liebrandt. Remember Charlie Liebrandt? Left-handed pitcher. Good, fine. Played a long time for Kansas City. John Mayberry, first baseman for Kansas City.
I remember his son, John Mayberry Jr.
Yes, you do. That's right. Jeff Montgomery, we talked about the relief pitcher there. Freddie Patek. Ever heard of Freddie Patek?
No.
Freddie Patek was like 5'3".
Wow.
Okay. I mean,
Tiny.
literally 5'3". And so I didn't, I remember him playing. I thought he played a lot of his career for the Pirates. But he only played the first 3 seasons for the Pirates when I was a kid. That's why I remember it, because he came and played. But he played 9 years for Kansas City, a career .242 hitter with a slugging percentage of .324.
I'm just saying it's not a good look for the Royals that this guy's in their top 24.
And somehow he was a 3-time All-Star. And you just love the guy because he was 5'3".
Right.
And I think that's the best thing about it. Danny Duffy. We know Danny Duffy, obviously.
Who was a guy for the Royals who was sort of the hope as their next big pitcher and who could just never get it together control-wise. Similar to, I believe, another pitcher that they had that ended up, Robbie Ray. I believe he was...
I don't remember him as a
Royal.
I don't think so.
Let me check.
I think he came up as a Tampa Bay Ray. And I think that was his first team. I don't think he was a Royal. But that would be interesting if he was there, because he must have really flamed out if he did, but I don't think so. So there's a name on here at number 23 in the all-time WAR that this is a guy I've never heard of. And this doesn't happen to me, right? Because this is a team that's been my lifetime and all that kind of stuff. The guy's name is Larry Gura. Okay, position. I had to look at the position. I don't even know what he played. He played pitcher. He had 126 wins in his career and 97 losses. Okay, he played 16 years of Major League Baseball.
And he's like a blind spot to
He played for the Yankees 2 years.
And you didn't know
when they were playing at Shea Stadium those 2 years in 74
Maybe
75.
that's why you blocked it out?
I don't know. He played 10 years for the Royals, was 111 and 78. He was not an original Royal. He didn't come to them until they were good in 76. He went 16 and 4 in 1978. How do I not know who this
how is
player
this guy
is?
so low on the WAR list? He's like a pretty good pitcher.
Yeah. As a Royal, he was 111 and 78, which I think is pretty good. 1,700 innings.
What was his ERA?
3.
Wow.
Yeah, 419. I'm sorry, 419 with a 1.25 WHIP. Anyway, just as much as we study the game and we follow out, something knocks you out like that, like Larry Gura. And I guess I need a Royal fan to tell me how great Larry Gura was because I never heard of the guy. And then David DeJesus is the last guy on our list. So. Are there any Royals on the team now that you could be? You mentioned Salvador Perez, should be a Royal his whole career, right? Has an outside shot at the Hall of Fame?
Outside shot.
Outside shot.
I think he's, especially if he puts together another 3 to 4 seasons like he has been.
You'd have to hit like 40 home runs, though. I mean, to really.
If he hits 30, 40 home runs and even 2 or 3 more seasons, he's knocking on the door. He's in the conversation.
Well, and that's because catchers are underrepresented.
Exactly.
So I think that could. But I can't think of any other players. Greinke. Right? But I mean,
young guys that are turning the corner.
And that's what they need to get, right? They got Bobby Witt Jr. now in that organization. They need to have a guy like that go Ronald Acuna.
Well, they were hoping Raul Mondesi Jr. was going to be that guy, but he wasn't. They were hoping Merrifield was going to be that guy, and he never really developed.
I think Merrifield was a really good ball player. They needed him to be better than he could be.
Right.
So I think that's
they needed him to develop into a complete attack player instead of just a guy that's going to be a really good leadoff hitter.
And so this year's team, I don't know. What do you think about this year's team?
They're not very good.
They're not very good. And in terms of the players, besides the up and coming players like we say Bobby Witt Jr. is going to be, they got Vinny Pasquantino. The best thing about Vinny is he's a big Jet fan. Now he's batting 247 this year.
There's just got a lot of guys on that lineup that do not inspire a lot.
And they're going to fix Franmil Reyes, which no team has been able to do that so far. They've got Jackie Bradley Jr. on their team.
That right
Okay, for
there.
a young team that's not going anywhere, you shouldn't have Jackie Bradley Jr. on your team playing anywhere, because you got to have somebody in an organization that could use the reps out there.
Right,
That's
going
going
to
to
get you more than what you're getting out of Jackie Bradley Jr.
So I think that's the biggest. I think Chapman will be traded. At the trading deadline, they'll try to get some assets for him. You say they're on the right path, boy. They seem so far away to me.
I think I don't know if they're on. You have to be worried if you're a team like the Royals, because you have a team like the Tigers that seem like they're kind of getting their rebuild in order. You have a team like the Guardians that are underperforming this year. You have a team like the White Sox, which should be better than the sum of their parts, but they can't seem to figure it out. And then you have the Twins. There's not a path that, like, it's not like the other teams in your division are also going to suddenly get worse.
Nor are they going to run away from you, though. I mean, all you need to do is you need to have a crazy 10-game winning streak, and all of a sudden you're in the mix. So I'm thinking about the Royals going. I think it's the kind of market to play in, and it's great to be a Royals player. I think the city loves its team. Yeah. They've always supported the team. If you're a guy who doesn't really do well in the limelight, right? Like, say maybe the bright lights of New York are too much for you, or LA. That's a place where Kansas City should look to bring, because you go there and you have your career, you're kind of under the radar. The press isn't as big, and after you, the fans are going to love you because that's the way they are in the Midwest. So if I'm the Royals, I'm looking around the league for guys that are underperforming in major markets that we might be able to bring here, give them a change of scenery, and hopefully have the city fall in love with them, and then all of a sudden turn their career around and to be what we thought it could be. I'm trying to think of a player that would fit that that mold right now, that underperformed and just
that would have been Joey Gallo last year,
right? It could have been Nick Castellanos, right? Before he turned it around, I think, a little bit now this year for the Phillies. So you're looking for those kinds of players to say, hey, a change of scenery.
It's really hard to build a World Series winner out of those types of players.
Yeah, it's still, you're still rolling dice.
Yeah.
Well, good luck, Royal fans. You still got a way to go, but love the color scheme of the team. Like the history of the team. Just wish they could do something and get into the mix.
And wish they hadn't beat us in 2015.
Yeah, that too.